Mr. Bannon, thanks for being here at this undisclosed location in Texas.
It's Steve.
Steve. It's good to have you
Yeah.
here. Thanks for being here.
Glad to be here. Excited.
And you're here very specifically to talk with me about something that you and I study very intently, and it's China.
Yep.
And I'd love to just start right off the bat with asking you, what do you think China's true intentions are in kind of their grand strategy? What is their grand strategy?
The grand strategy is very simple. It's to be a hegemonic world power. I mean, you can see through One Belt, One Road. You can see through Made in China 2025. You can see through everything they're doing, their strategy of being like the East India Company in sub-Saharan Africa, what they're doing in the Caribbean, now what they're doing in Latin America, the economic war, what we call all forces of government, right? All areas of government focus on the economic war against the United States, their military buildup, they're basically trying to close the South China Sea. It is the most geopolitically ambitious strategy we've ever seen. Let me be very specific. The three great theories of geopolitics. You've got Mackinder's theory of the Asian landmass. You have Mahan's theory of cutting off the choke points of the world's oceans. And you have Speakman's theory of keeping your enemy off of the Asian landmass. The Chinese are the only power in world history to ever try to do all three simultaneously. You know, Napoleon and Hitler and others tried to do the Eurasian landmass. Others, the British and the American empires, the British Empire and the American system we have today is built off Mahan's naval strategy, and then Speakman's is one from the early 20th century. What China is doing is with One Belt, One Road, trying to basically connect the old Silk Road all the way up to Italy. As we saw in the paper today, the Italian government, the guys in the five-star, De Maio came back from Beijing. They had a huge thing about, hey, we want to end the One Belt, One Road in Italy where Marco Polo essentially left. We had a vote this week in the Maldives which really rejected what they're trying to do in the Mahan strategy of taking all the naval bases and choke points throughout the world. And then Speakman, what they're trying to do is force the United States, which has been a Pacific power, off of the landmass through what they're doing in the South China Sea, what they're doing around Taiwan. They want to push us back to Guam. So listen, they're the most, people have said for years to kind of cover this. A lot of the Wall Street and City of London and Frankfurt crowd have kind of said, oh, well, they're not territorially ambitious. They've never been an expansionist power. Well, they're a geopolitically expansionist power, and it's quite extraordinary what they're doing and doing it at the same time.
And do you think that their kind of, let's say, their newfound economic greatness or their perceived greatness post-financial crisis, they always believed they were kind of a second-rate power financially going into 2008, and the world seems to believe that they were the engine of the world's growth from 2009, 2018. Is it that economic growth that they build their geopolitical assertiveness on, in your opinion?
Listen, I think it's since time immemorial, the access to the Chinese market, kind of this mystery of the Chinese market, has always drawn in the West, right? Whether it's the British coming there at first with the East India Company, or later the China, schooners from the United States, right? The China trade. It was always this thing about China. What we've seen, and I happen to believe that the Chinese economic system is built on a house of sand. And I think it's going to lead us to a greater financial debacle than 2008 ever was, in the same culprits, the exact same culprits that led to the financial crisis in 2008. The investment banks, the commercial banks, the hedge funds, the government entities, right? The same elites that led to that financial crisis and got bailed out and had no responsibility, no accountability, have been the same exact actors that have exacerbated this situation in China. And so, yes, the reason the world's elites, the party at Davos, the people on Wall Street, what I call the IR departments of China, which are the investment banks, particularly Goldman Sachs and some commercial banks, the lobbyists for China, which is basically the 25 or 30 largest corporations that deal in China today. They're lobbyists in Washington, D.C. These are all, and by the big private equity guys like Schwartzman, these guys, they're all going to have to be held accountable for what went on in China. What China was able to do in basically coordination with the elites in the West was deindustrialize the industrial democracies of the West, both Europe and the United States. That's why Brexit and 2016 are inextricably linked. What it is the exporting of Chinese overcapacity and Chinese deflation in basic industrial goods. And so China has, and from the Chinese point of view, it's been quite brilliant. They've essentially taken 350 million of their people from kind of working poverty to middle class, and 400 million people from abject poverty to working poverty. So essentially 2/3 of their population, because their population I really think is closer to 1.3 or 1.4 billion than what they say in 1.1. So what they've done is heroic in 30 years, okay, from a strategy point of view. But that has been exacerbated by the elites in the West who basically kind of financed it and brought it along. In fact, the reason Trump was, I think, so special, he said, hey, this is not the way the world has to be. It could be very different. We've basically financed the rise of China. We've built China. And all he heard for years, and what you heard for years is, no, this is what I call the second law of thermodynamics, or this is an immutable law of physics, the rise of China. And what Trump says, no, this is through human agency. It's the commercial banks, the investment banks, the corporations, the kowtowed to the Chinese regime. And one thing I want to make sure, Kyle, I get up in front, this is not about the Chinese people. I served as a naval officer over in China in the Western Pacific in the 7th Fleet on a destroyer in the mid-70s. I think 76, 77 is the first time I went to China. I've been involved in China virtually all my life. I've owned businesses over there. I've lived in Shanghai for a while in the French concession. I have a great, not just admiration, but a deep love for the Chinese people. In fact, they have a saying over there called old 100 names, which is basically the common man, because there's 100 last surnames in China. So old 100 names is essentially the deplorables, right? And those in the old 100 names is a sense of common decency, their grit, their determination. What they've been through as a people is nothing short of heroic. The problem we have is we have a totalitarian regime of the Chinese Communist Party, and quite frankly, the leadership, the elite leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, that are really in business with the party at Davos, which is this, kind of scientific, engineering, managerial, financial, cultural elite that I say kind of emanates from the World Economic Forum in Davos, but really is in London and New York, Washington, D.C., Silicon Valley,
right,
et cetera.
And do you think the way that they've ingratiated themselves into, let's say, the Davos man, as is commonly referred to, the way that they've gotten there is it through economic coercion? Is it through investing in our universities, our think tanks, our lobbyists, as you said, and our corporations, and even the people that are U.S. citizens looking to make profits in China? Is that how they control that narrative?
Let's go back.
How do they get there?
Let's go back to, in 1 week, in January 2017, we had two, I think, seminal speeches. Okay, we had the Davos speech of President Xi, okay, which was the high hosanna to globalism.
Yeah.
And it was, to me, repulsive. Repulsive. How the mainstream media and Davos man just sat there and bought it all and said, what a great leader, what a great humanitarian, what he's going to lead us through about climate, on the world's environment, what he's going to do, for globalization or for the economy. And then you saw Donald Trump's, inaugural address was, I think, 3 days later, in which he said, hey, we're getting back to the nation state. And America is going to start to focus on our sovereignty, and other nations should start thinking about their sovereignty. But this globalization and what's coming out of Davos is stripped our sovereignty from us, and we're going to reassert that. And 2 years later, which happened this week, was Mike Pence's speech about the new strategy of the United States, which has really been going along for quite a while, which is now kind of engaging China, right? An engagement with China, but not like Henry Kissinger and not like the Thucydides trap crowd. And I know you did this seminal interview with Graham Allison, but not what those guys want, which is to kind of us stumble along and play along with China. This is, this is a direct confrontation with China to say, we're not going to take it anymore. You've been in economic war with us, and we're going to reassert us. Your question about how they ingratiate themselves, they're the guys who wrote the biggest checks. Right. They wrote checks to the universities. They wrote checks. They've essentially bought off the City of London and Wall Street and the corporations. You just know. I say this in a sense of kind of anger. The great investment banks in London and in New York became the investor relations department for this regime, okay?
In the pursuit of profits.
In the total pursuit of profits.
Yes.
And corporations became their lobbyists. When Lee He's deputy came to the United States about 4 weeks ago, when they had this kind of last round of trying to put something together in the trade deal, there wasn't much going on, but he sent his deputy and a small contingent to see Steve Mnuchin and the guys at Treasury. They went to, the very first stop they made was to, the day before they went to Treasury, they stopped and they had a meeting with, I think it was 15 or 20 large corporations, the heads of government affairs, and I think the presidents, not the CEOs, because the guy wasn't high enough. And he basically said, hey boys, you have a problem, right? And you have to figure out how to help us fix it, okay? Another thing, they had, Wang Qishan announced this kind of financial advisory panel. Being on their back foot by the Trump strategy, they kind of said, hey, we need a financial advisory panel to help us understand what the United States wants, what the United States needs. And it was named, Paulson and Schwartzman and all these characters. And it's interesting. When they need somebody to kind of come over and, help intermediate with the United States, they go to the same guys that have been profiting on this. My understanding is that people came back and said, hey, the UN General Assembly is happening. It's opera season in New York. My schedule's full. And Wang Qishan said, hey boys, I don't think you're listening. We're having a meeting. I want everybody to show up. This is general quarters. And so, no, I think when we look back on this, it's going to be, people are going to be absolutely stunned when they see how the elites, right, of the Western democracies and the United States went along with China and exacerbated a situation when it was quite evident they were at economic war with us.
Yeah. Going back on this one issue, the way that the influence is being pushed through the corporations, we at our firm know that there are there's a couple of handfuls of corporations that each have more than $1 billion in capital that they're trying to get back from China, and they've been unable to get a dime out of China since November of 2016, when China closed its capital account completely. When you were in the administration, did you interface with any of these companies that were going through a lot of, pardon the pun, red tape, trying to get their money out of China?
Listen, the very first thing.
Did they come appeal to you?
Yeah, I think this will be a big shocker to people. Remember, when Trump won in a complete, upset that nobody saw coming, and particularly you have this post-war, liberal, democratic, rules-based order, okay? The Chinese have done nothing but game the system from day one on every set of rules. The rules are what they determine they are, okay? And nobody calls them on it because everybody thinks they're too weak. And so in the corporations, I think until
the corporation's afraid to call them on it?
Absolutely.
Because they know if they say 100%. That we can't get our money out, they shut their business off?
They'll be shut down.
There's a quid pro quo?
Shut down. They absolutely fear it. Look at when they came back on this whole, by the way, on the entire situation with the tariffs, and tariffs are just not about tariffs and not about protectionism. That's why Trump's done it at such a scale. Remember, before Trump got here, people were talking about $25, $30 billion of tariffs. It was like, oh my God, that's so huge. Trump's program is $500 billion in tariffs, right, to tariff goods, because he knows the Chinese can't respond.
Correct.
And here's why they can't respond. People in the United States have to understand one thing. The Chinese look at us as a tributary state to them, and let me explain that. China's been around for 4,000 years, right? They've had good runs and they've had bad runs, okay? But one thing they know, and the reason they're still organized as a nation over 4,000 years, right? They know how to handle allies and they know how to handle bad guys, okay? Now what they've done is they've got this system called barbarian management, and they know how to manage barbarians. The way they manage the barbarians is they take the leaders of the barbarians and they give them a taste of the good life. And you're going to be something special. You're going to get a special deal. Now, what happens back into the tributary state is whatever happens. That's your problem. Right. Okay? So you're going to, in the United States, what they have done for 25 and 30 years is played us as a barbarian state, barbarian management. Okay? They incentivize our elites, and our elites deindustrialize, particularly the upper Midwest of this country. It's the reason Donald Trump's president. Your audience should understand one thing that's important is that, J.D. Vance, the great guy from Yale who wrote Hillbilly Elegies, is the best sociological study of the Trump voter. And it was J.D. Vance who told me, he says, hey, those studies that come out of MIT and Harvard show that there's a direct correlation between the factories that left for China, the jobs that left with them, and the opioid crisis. Because this is not about tariffs.
It's actually logic.
It's not about tariffs. What this is about is human dignity and self-worth. Those factories went, Wall Street made the money, the corporations benefit from it for lower cost, and devil catch the hindmost on the workers. And so this is what Trump is kind of totally reversed. Now, what China sees us as is we're a tributary state. We send them natural resources, soybeans, beef, cattle, Boeing Airlines and Apple products. Oh, excuse me. We don't send Boeing Airlines and Apple products. You know why? Because they forced Boeing to do a joint venture and they forced Apple to make the products over there. So we're Jamestown to their Great Britain. Okay, and that's why the tariffs at the scale that Trump put them up at, they can't respond to. Okay.
Well, what's interesting is let's assume we put 25% on 520 billion. We're literally talking about a little over $100 billion.
Yes.
And I know that's a lot of money.
Yes.
But our economy is 19 trillion.
Yes.
It's still not that functionally meaningful to us, in my opinion.
Yes.
But I do think it's a leveling of a field. To your point,
it's converging.
They've been fighting a trade war with us since 2001, and we just haven't fought back.
Okay. The average compounded growth of the United States of America from 1946, the end of World War II, to 2000 was 3.5%. Okay? It's the reason we became a superpower. That economic engine that was unlocked and grew every year at 3.5% through good times and bad, on average.
Yep.
Since China joined the World Trade Organization, when they joined, they got most favored nation, the growth of the United States is 1.9%. Okay, 1.9%. And there's a lot of factors to that, but the central beating heart of it is China. That's because we deindustrialized. We sent our manufacturing over there. Yes, the tariffs in and of themselves on a nominal number, an absolute number, are not huge. But when we look at the convergence of everything, what Trump has done is said, hey, we're at economic war. And we're going to hit back with it. We're going to hit back with the 301s to stop the forced technology transfers. We're going to put these tariffs into the scale they've never seen before. We're going to have the ability, if we so desire, to liquidate companies like ZTE, to basically cut them off from their component parts in the West. They'll be out of business in 90 days. Also, the new things about investments, about these limitation in investments.
CFIUS reform.
The CFIUS reform that people are talking about. You bring all forces of government together on that and the stopping of intellectual property, you have something. What Trump has done, and this is why NAFTA was so important. You know, people mocked and ridiculed Trump. There's a book out called Fear that Gary Cohn, the president of Goldman Sachs, great Goldman Sachs, and I used to work there, he takes the documents off the president's desk. The book opens where he's taken the NAFTA deal, right, early on in the deal on Korea, he actually takes them off the desk because in his judgment, right, the president wasn't smart enough to understand what he was doing. Well, here's what Trump's done. The new NAFTA deal that he's created is basically setting up a geostrategic manufacturing base to counter East Asia, okay? And Japan is very quickly going to be part of that. A bilateral deal, not some TPP deal where we're just one among many. A direct bilateral deal with Japan as a partner. We've got one with Korea we're updating. And then the EU, Juncker has already told Trump, has already indicated that they're going to be a part of this too. What Donald Trump has done in less than 2 years against the second law of thermodynamics, right? The immutable law of the rise of China.
Right.
What he's done is reorient the entire world's supply chain away from China. And this is going to have economic growth opportunities that are going to be incredible. And he's done that kind of single-handedly against the fighting of the corporatist lobby, the fighting of the Wall Street Investor Relations Department, et cetera. So that's why I think it's really heroic.
It's that policy is one that it's interesting at the timing. If you look at just let's say the economic laws of China were already slowing down before we decided to fight back. It just so happens to be that this pushback from a tariff, or whether the most elegant idea was the border adjustable tax, which was immediately killed by you and I both know who.
I love that one.
That was perfect, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
But now,
by the way,
tariffs are not perfect.
I am a huge believer that, and I'm, Paul Ryan and I've had our differences. When he first walked me through that, I said, that's the solution.
Exactly right.
That's the solution.
It's kind of an egalitarian way of going at it.
I think, and we all know why I got crushed.
Yeah.
I think that is something that should be brought back up and very quickly in future years.
We could do away with tariffs if we imposed a border adjustable tax.
Well, by the way, let's talk about tariffs for a second. President Trump, remember at the G7, when he was lectured by his betters, Merkel and Macron on the first day, about this whole thing about tariffs, right? He came back the next day for breakfast, and what Trump told the G7, he said, okay, I thought about it last night. How about this? No tariffs. Absolutely no tariffs, but no subsidies.
Yeah.
People have to realize, like, the White House put out this document, I think it's over 2 months ago now, the 50 things that China is doing in its economic war with us. It's kind of what the United States wants China to stop. That's the deal. You stop that, we're all good. When you look at that, it's not just the tariffs. It's the investment in state-owned industries. Yeah. Remember, they have
free land, free electricity,
free land. What they've done. Look at what they've done in steel and aluminum throughout the world. Look what they've done with shipbuilding. You can go every heavy industry. They've gutted. They've gutted the Western Europe, and they've gutted the United States, and they continue to do that purposely. And they're also, by the way, ZTE showed you this. They have to create, I think it's some number of 11 million jobs a year. They're under enormous internal economic pressure to create those jobs. They can't afford to have 150,000 high value added jobs at ZTE just go away. Same thing with the steel. They're kind of caught on the wheel now. I mean, they're the first to admit they have to keep adding capacity, right? Because they got to keep these guys working. So I think that that's why the Chinese model and all this happy talk that comes from the West about the Chinese model, when you really look at it, and I know you are one of the world's handful of experts, I think it looks at the numbers as they really are and not what people hope they are and not how they're spun by China. Because every number that comes out of China, to me, has to be questioned, verified, trust, but verified. Has to be questioned, verified, and then verified again. You got to get a belt and suspenders. And that's why I think we may be hurtling to another financial crisis driven by this financial model of China that can't withstand, can't stand up on its own.
Right. Well, the good news about that is if we're right about China, we're right about their incredible build, their reckless build of credit, coupled with the fact their economy is slowing down, coupled with the size of their banking system, their GDP. If we're right about all those things, the good news is their banks aren't inextricably linked to ours the way that ours were to Europe and Asia's back during our financial crisis.
They're not, but you used the word they're reckless. And I think that this is what upsets me about the lack of accountability and responsibility by the world's elites. We just went through the worst financial crisis in history. Not one CEO went to jail, and not anybody significantly gave up any equity, okay? What they did is basically inflate, people got to remember, on September 18th of 2008, when Bernanke and Paulson walked into the Oval Office with Bush, and he sent them up to Capitol Hill, the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve was $880 billion. On the day that Donald Trump took the oath of office, on January 20th of 2017, it was $4.5 trillion. Yep. All we did in the Bank of England, ECB, Bank of Japan did the same thing.
And the PBOC.
PBOC. What they did is to save the elites, was to turn on the spigots of liquidity. So if you owned assets, if you owned real estate, you owned stocks, you owned intellectual property, you've had the greatest 10-year run in history. If you're a working class schmendrick, you had your wages are flat. The whole burden of it, this is what's unfair, and this is where the anger that's driving the populist movement. The whole burden comes down on the little guy to finance these deficits with his taxes.
That's right.
And then his kids get sent everywhere in the world to defend this. That's what's got to stop. You use the word reckless. It is reckless disregard of what the elites have done this time. Because all they've done, Chinese banks, look, the American banking system has $19 trillion of assets on it.
Correct.
And I would respectfully submit, and you're 10 times smarter than me on this, I would respectfully submit that all of those assets are not good, okay? Maybe, let's say 10% or more could be written off today. That's the American banking system. The Chinese banking system, I think, has $49 trillion of assets.
That's right.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think 45 trillion have been put on the books since 2008. This is completely reckless. Now, thank God they're not interconnected through the SWIFT system with the rest of the banks.
Or through derivatives.
Derivatives.
Yeah.
And by the way, the reason is, and this is another tell, because none of the investment banks or none of the guys want to say, whoa, we can't hook up with China, right? Because they all stop themselves from doing it. They all limited their exposure to it because they understand when it implodes, they don't want to be taken down in the first couple of minutes. That being said, those banks are going to implode. Nobody can put those kind of assets on, okay, and have a great banking system.
Yeah.
This is a total and complete sham. And in The Economist, in the Financial Times of London, all the elites, all the conferences they have. You had Richard Haas on this morning on Morning Joe. Richard Haas from the Council of Foreign Relations. And all he's doing is beating up Mike Pence and Donald Trump from Pence's speech last night. You know what he's saying? He's saying, hey, all my Chinese colleagues, all my buddies in China, they're telling me They don't know what the United States wants. They came over here. They want a deal and they want to be our partner, but we keep moving the goalposts. That is reckless for him to say that.
Yeah.
He fully understands what the issues are, okay? And he sits there on a general news show in the morning that, basic voters watch and starts putting this stuff into the mind is unacceptable. I got to tell you, Kyle, that's what I think what you're doing here, what you're doing with your work and other things. There are a number of people like yourself that are sitting there going, this can't continue. And people are going to be held accountable for this. If the elites think they're going to skip on this one, it's not going to happen. The reason Donald Trump's president, the reason you're seeing these populist revolts, whether it's in Italy, Germany, France, throughout the world, in Brazil this weekend, okay, in Argentina, in Pakistan, is the reason is the little guy is fed up with a group of elites that know better, right? And to take care of themselves, they will play ball with anybody.
You're right. And when you talk about the Chinese banking system, let's assume that it has to restructure. What they'll do, they're very smart. The people that run the PBOC and SAFE.
Let's talk about this. Here's how smart they are. When we went over with Trump's visit, remember, they didn't make any of the changes. They weren't going to let us in on anything else after that, except they would open up the finance sector.
Says the spider to the fly.
Exactly.
They've already wrecked their financial system.
Oh, but we'll open
and
it up
now you can invest.
Now you can invest.
Why does the world not see this, Steve?
The world absolutely sees this.
They're starting to see it.
Hang on. No,
the
Kyle,
world's
Kyle,
economists are just starting to see this.
No, Kyle. You are much too kind. You're a good man, okay? You've got to call it like it is. It's bullshit. Okay, they know exactly. You're telling me the guys in the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times of London, the Economist, these smart guys in these think tanks don't know exactly what's going on? Some moron like me can look at the balance sheet of these banks and say, hey, guess what? I think we have a ticking time bomb, right?
But you know what they say? But it's China. That's what I hear all the time. I agree with you, but it's China, so we're going to keep writing what we write.
Yeah. That's got to stop. China must be, okay, we cut a deal with them in the late 90s. Remember, you had a spectrum back then of the China cheerleaders, the rational accommodationists, and the hawks. Okay, so let's talk about this. Back in 99, that was the pitch from the appeasers. And people have to understand it's both political parties. This is not about ideology. This is all Democrats and Republicans, okay? Yeah. When they're talking about China, they're just trying to figure out how to get more money in their own pockets. So the cheerleaders said exactly what, hey, it's China. Once we get them into the most favored nations, once we get them into the WTO, they're going to turn out to be liberal capitalists. They're going to, they're going to vote.
Liberalize their economy. They're going to democratize. They're going to let us invest in everything.
They're going to be middle class.
Yeah.
They're going to be.
It's going to create a rule of law. Maybe?
Rule of law. It's going to be nirvana, and they're going to be okay. So we know 17 years later. Guess what? They're a totalitarian regime, mercantilist regime. They've got a system that works for them, for the elite, for their regime, and it works well. Now you have two sets of folks. The the cheerleaders are gone. Nobody's a cheerleader. You have rational accommodationists and you have hawks. Rational accommodationist has got a new name. It's Thucydides' trap. It's your buddy Graham Allison and Henry Kissinger. And here's the great concept they got, okay? Their great concept is America's a declining power. China's a rising power, like Athens was a declining power, and Sparta was a rising power. Yeah. And what you have to figure out to avoid a global conflict, which is like 16 times in world history this has happened, and 12 times they just weren't wise enough to take it. What has to happen is the declining power can figure out how to nudge the rising power to kind of get into their system. Now, you'll always be the junior partner, but you'll make the big guy kind of work with you and everything will be happy. This is the exact same nonsense from the exact same people, from Allison Graham and from Henry Kissinger, that they spun on Nixon in the late 60s about Russia. Let's go back in time.
Yeah.
The same exact pitch. Russia's a rising power. America's a declining power. And what we have to do, we need détente. We need rapprochement. We need to let them have their sphere of influence. It was bullshit then, and it's bullshit now. Ronald Reagan came in and said, hey, you know what? How big is their economy? And they said, Russia's economy is the size of California.
Yeah.
He says, why do people fear him? The very first thing that Andy Marshall at the Net Assessment Group in the Pentagon and Bill Casey, the CIA, did was do a complete analysis of the Russian economy. And they found out it was only half as big. Oops, I have a miss. 50% bigger.
And they were desperately short dollars.
Desperately short of dollars. This is the whole thing that always happens.
Exactly where China is.
It's because they did the exact same thing with China. They put it into military spending that was not productive. So here we go with the exact same set of guys. And what they tell us 40, 50 years later, hey, America's a declining power. China's a rising power. And I look at it, it's the exact same thing. They have an economy with no dollars. Here's the point I make to them. How about this? How about we stop being a declining power? That is not a law of physics. A process that manages us to decline, okay, is not a process I accept. I am looking for a leader to step up and make America great again, okay? And that's Trump's basic pitch. And guess what? In 2 years, he proved the Chinese are a paper tiger.
When you think about, again, their grand strategy, our pushback, and where we are in the globe today, what do you think China's next step is? If you were predicting what their next step would be, given our assertiveness that we've stepped forward on the economic, call it, side of the coin and pushed in some tariffs and are starting to reassert ourselves.
You see,
what do you think they're going to do?
Number one, they want regime.
What's textbook?
They want regime change in the United States. They believe they have a 80% chance of getting Trump, winning the House, doing whatever they need to do with psychological warfare, with money, with whatever they have to do to basically thwart Trump and lose the House of Representatives, see him impeached this year, and 100% probability they'll beat him in 2020. Number one is the removal of Donald J. Trump as President of the United States.
Okay.
Because they say that is the railhead of everything that's happened to us badly. And we've got to get a globalist in there.
Their game's just to wait him out.
Not just wait him out. I think take active measures. Now, yesterday, Pence said yesterday, and Axios and other people reported there's classified information that shows the Chinese involvement and real meddling. This is not some Russia guys on Facebook. This is the real deal, because this is all the chips in the middle of the table. That's number one. Number two, I think what you're seeing, the Italians said today that hey, China's going to be our big buddy. I think you're going to see a double and triple down on One Belt, One Road. I think you'll see a double and triple down on Made in China 2025. I think you'll see the East India project in Sub-Saharan Africa, the Caribbean, in Venezuela, in Latin America. I think they're going to double and triple down. They got a lot of R&B to spend, right? And if a guy can take R&B,
but no one's going to take R&B.
This is going to be the great question we're going to have in front of us. Because they're in the Gulf right now. They're all over the UAE. They're all over Saudi Arabia. They're all over Qatar. They're all over every resource area in the world, from Argentina to Sub-Saharan Africa to South Africa. And they're going to try to see it geopolitically. The number three, because remember, in the great textbook that they put out and basically printed in English in the late 90s, written by these two brilliant colonels in the Chinese War College, called Unconventional Warfare. Unconventional Warfare.
Admiral Liu?
Yeah. It's a book that should be read by everybody. Is that because it laid out China's strategy. They said there's three types of warfare. There's information warfare, there's economic warfare, and there's kinetic, or kind of guns up warfare. And what we want to do is avoid kinetic. Because the one thing America can do is kick your ass, right? So we want to avoid that, okay? And so let's focus on information and economic warfare. And they've run the tables. I mean, it's textbook. You go back and read that. They've done exactly what they said they're going to do. I think, and I believe, that given the fact that Trump is now converging all forces of government power onto the economic warfare, and they are taken back, and the regime is under huge pressure, because I believe the Deng Xiaoping faction and others, even at the highest level, who believe in collective leadership, have said, hey, what we have here is a cult of personality.
You mean the ones that haven't been jailed or killed yet?
The ones that haven't been jailed or killed yet have sat there and go, Deng believed in working with the West.
Yeah.
Deng believed in reform. Deng believed in opening up. But Deng believed in being a good partner. And particularly, keep your lights down. Don't get up in somebody's grill. That what they see with Xi is a return to the cult of personality of Mao.
Yes.
And he's under tremendous pressure internally. I believe, I said on my radio show, and everybody quotes me on this, back in, I think it was 2014 to 2015, that in 5 years we'll be in a shooting war in the South China Sea. As a 22-year-old naval officer, I was on patrol in the South China Sea on an American destroyer, okay? And I said, where in the hell am I, right? You know, what is this place? Because every tanker in the world coming through the Straits of Malacca, from the Persian Gulf, You got every huge tanker. You got every boxcar. It's a super highway.
40% of China's energy needs come through the Strait of
40%. I
Malacca.
think it's 1/3 of the world's trade. $5 trillion.
It is.
My point. This is a super high. When people say the South China Sea, here's what you got to understand. It's a super highway of commerce. The biggest ships in the world, 24/7, 365 days a year. What China did, and they came to the Rose Garden in 2015 and looked the American people and the American president lied to them. They built essentially 7 or 8 stationary aircraft carriers. They call them reefs, or these are stationary aircraft carriers. Mischief Reef, Scarborough Reef, all these.
Yeah.
These reefs are basically aircraft carriers. And what they've done is they put fire control radars, search radars. They've got combat planes on them. I mean, these things go
10,000-foot runways. So
so the United States.
Why did Obama? So China said to us specifically when Obama was president, we will not militarize our islands in the South China Sea. We'll not go to the Spratlys. Everything we're building is just for research purposes. Why? How do we engage China now that we see that every single one of these islands, whether it's Fiery Cross or Mischief or the others, have 10,000-foot runways, anti-missile batteries on them, and all of the weapons that they said they never put there. Now they're landing nuclear bombers there. How do we engage them? Do we engage them over this, or do we just let them keep going?
When I got into the White House as chief strategist, okay, with Mike Flynn when we first got there on the National Security Council in the transition, I said the 3 things you got to do is devolve fighting capability to the combatant commanders. The White House was running the wars against ISIS.
So give it to Harry Harris.
Yeah. Well, no. In this regard, give it to the guys in CENTCOM and let them take on ISIS. You got to devolve, the power to fight wars and the ability to fight wars back to combatant commanders. Number 2, we got to figure out in this National Security Council thing the Obama appointees, how we're going to get our own people in there over time. Number 3, I said we have to go back and get every document related to Obama's pivot to Asia. I said, I want to see exactly what they looked at. And people should know, in the White House, I worked 7 days a week, 18 to 20 hours a day, okay? 50% of my time was on the pivot to Asia. Why Obama did it, what we were going to do to counter it.
It was Kurt Campbell's.
Kurt Campbell. Here's what I found. I thought it'd be a whole room full of documents. It was pretty thin. And what I found is that the United States itself, it was not really engaged institutionally against China. You had some great people, but there wasn't all forces that kind of thought through, hey, an economic plan or a war plan against China to engage in this economic war. In fact, what you saw, the entire pivot to Asia became, I think, putting a Marine brigade in Darwin, Australia, was basically the issue. So Harry Harris was a guy, everybody told me, Harry Harris is the man. So I got Harry Harris back, Admiral Harris back. I spent, a lot of time with him getting schooled on exactly what's going on. And the one thing I found that was shocking is that the South China Sea, when I was a young naval officer, we went through the South China Sea, guns up, radars up, everything moving. It's called free navigation. We did in international waters what we want to do, when we want to do it, because we're the United States Navy. Okay, we keep the sea lanes free. What I found out now is they got these reeds, everything like that. In China, we only go through in what's called safe navigation. You go through with your radars off, no fire control solutions, like a good little boy. Just kind of go, and you're basically asking their permission to go. The South
China, I was unaware.
The South China, they consider when they lost in the international court, China considers the South China Sea to be an internal sea to China.
I know.
They consider
the 9-dotted line of 1949
the 9-dotted line
is a joke.
They think it's a territorial sea.
I know.
They are not prepared. The first thing they'll tell you that the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of China is not to be questioned. Not to be questioned. And they consider that 9-dot line, the more people put it into documents, the more people put it on TV shows, the more people that re-infer that meme they want, because they believe that that's reality.
Yeah.
You ask me what's going to happen? The South China Sea, I said on my radio show 5 years ago, we're being a shooting war. The South China Sea, the situation in Qatar and the Persian Gulf and the South China Sea are the 2 greatest hotspots in the world for a global conflict to start, okay? Yeah. Not Korea. Korea is a vassal state of China. The whole Korean thing is nothing but a Chinese drama, okay? And President Trump's doing an amazing job on it. The South China Sea is a flashpoint, and you saw the other night, as a former naval officer, I'm telling you, those 2 ships, you had an American, the USS
50
Decatur,
feet apart.
The USS Decatur was on patrol.
Yeah. And
you basically had a Chinese destroyer come up and play chicken with it. 50 feet apart. If those 2 ships had hit,
What would have happened?
First off, 200 or 300 sailors would have died. Okay, absolutely. If those two ships had hit at the speeds that they were going, the relative speeds they were going, we would have had a catastrophe. Okay, now I don't know what could have happened to the weapons or what could have happened to the fuel, but I'm telling you, at the speeds, what the Chinese did was reckless. And that was a challenge to us. Remember, what the Decatur did was go 12 miles from one of these reefs. Okay? Now, what the Chinese say is within 15 miles is their territorial water. They said it was a violation of their sovereign territory for the United States Navy to come 12 miles off a reef that they built into the South China Sea. My recommendation is I think the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, who to me has been very even-handed with China and really, tried to build a relationship. I think you ought to give the Chinese 72 hours to take every radar, every offensive thing on a military, all the jets, everything out of the runways, everything off the islands. You get 72 hours to take it all off. And on the 72nd hour and 1 minute, the United States Navy is going to go in there and take it off for them. And then I think they ought to take those reefs and they ought to dismount them and turn them back into international waters. They say the United States is provocative by putting the United States Navy back into the South China Sea to keep the sea lanes open. I happen to believe where this relationship is going and the lack of a real response the Chinese is going to have, that they're going to try to do something provocative in the South China Sea to try to initiate a response. And I think the president ought to be proactive on this. I think you ought to tell them you get 72 hours. If you don't take it off, we're going to take it off for you. And then dare them to stop the United States Navy from going to do it.
Wait, you're saying go to a kinetic conflict in 72 hours in a minute.
I didn't say go to a kinetic conflict. What I said was
if we go to try to take this off, they're not going to let that happen.
The international courts ruled that it was inappropriate for him to be there. Why don't we enforce that? The party at Davos, when she came and gave that great speech at Davos, they all jumped up about. They failed to say, you just mentioned, they looked the people of the United States in the eye and lied to them from the Rose Garden in 2015 with the President of the United States right next to them. Okay,
yeah. And no one called them on it.
And never called them on it. And then you saw when the international courts came and said, "Hey, this is totally unacceptable. There's no argument for it. It's got to be undone." They just sat there. What they've sat there and said, "Hey, there's our territorial sea." Now I realize people saying, "Bannon, what kind of crazy whack job are you? It's somewhere and we don't even know where it is in the South China Sea. We're going to go to war." People have to understand the global economy, and I'm a nationalist, okay? But the health of the American economy is based on trade. Populists and economic nationalists are not anti-trade. They're anti this radical concept of free trade when you're trading with a totalitarian mercantilist society.
Right.
What Trump wants and what he said from day one is fair trade and reciprocity. Okay, reciprocity. And I think now we're going to get down to it with China. China's going to have to understand that Donald Trump is never going to back down on this.
Yeah.
Okay, he's a fair man. Okay, he's a decent man. He's tried to work with them. But the days of the United States being pushed around with this are over.
Well, let me ask you a provocative question then. If we were to go
How we get any more provocative? I said we're going to war in the South China Sea.
It's just the derivative of that. If we're just going even more.
Along here
I'm actually just going the other. It's equally as provocative.
Okay.
What if we were to just take our 7th Fleet and go home?
Here's the thing. People have to remember, I think it's very important for people to remember that the United States is a Pacific power.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole development of this country, the Transcontinental Railroad, the whole West Coast, we are inextricably linked to the health of Asia's economy.
Well, Article 5 protections of Japan would be a real issue, but I say that because if we were to have to go to, let's say we were to get to the point where we either had to go to war or had to come home.
Coming home is not an option.
Not an option.
Not an option. The world would be would get to be an incredibly dark and dangerous place. You could have appeasement there. You could have a Munich, right? You could have people say, "Hey, let's just pull out. They built the islands. They're a rising naval power. We don't want to fight. We don't want to." And look, listen, one of the cores about Trump's, it is non-interventionist. However, what America First stands for, national security, is where it's in the vital national security interest of the United States. It'll be in the vital national security interest of our local partners. That's what America First means. Trump is not going around the world looking for fights. He's trying to calm things down with Russia. He's trying to calm things down in Syria. He's trying to find a solution in Afghanistan. He's trying to find a solution in Korea. He's trying to find a solution in Venezuela. And your viewers should understand, Donald Trump didn't create any of this.
Yeah.
This is Richard Haas and all the fucking geniuses, okay, of the party at Davos. They're the ones that dumped Korea. They're the ones that dumped Afghanistan and Venezuela and China on his lap. What Trump is saying is that America First, our allies will be in their vital national security interests either. And you can go around and talk to Singapore and Thailand and Indonesia and Australia and ask them, hey, does an American naval presence in this neighborhood a good thing or a bad thing? Yeah. And they will tell you, no, it's a vital thing. We need America, and we need America here, because if we lose the South China Sea, we will lose any type of commerce, trying to control the whole place. And the Chinese understand that. That's why they're trying to push us out. And they're starting to already have the psychological warfare of exactly that. Hey, it's 12,000 miles away. It's really Asia. What are we involved here for? This is another debacle.
You're already hearing it.
This is another debacle like Iraq and Afghanistan. The United States is too. Look, I'm the biggest proponent of America First. South China Sea and the engagement with China is absolutely vital.
Interesting. Okay. Let's go to one other. I have two more questions for you. One is why has the U.S. not had a people management process in the U.S.? And what I mean by that is, you read the DIUX report, they call it declassified, or actually it never was classified, Defense Department report on the infiltration of China into our research universities and our labs.
And our weapons labs.
Weapons labs funded by DARPA, the Air Force. And why haven't we put into place a proper people management process?
I want you to go back, because I don't think people understand these reports. These reports are essentially declassified reports that showed that the 300,000 students that are here on student visas, right, and the 10,000 contractors that we have in the weapons labs that, up to, I think it's 2/3 could be intelligence assets, right? And some percentage are intelligence officers or agents.
And they're working in our labs.
They're working in our labs. This is
on weapons technology funded by our government.
This is political correctness and greed and avarice writ large. How did contractors, and let's call them out, Booz Allen and McKinsey, all these contractors, how did these contractors on these big government programs get so many Chinese nationals working into our weapons labs? Our weapons labs are at the cutting edge of national security. How did it happen? And so this has got to be done right away. I don't know why. It's been a huge, I think, bone of contention inside the administration. The political correctness of it all. Stephen Miller, the Financial Times of London, leaked the other day that my colleague, Stephen Miller, who's a terrific young man, actually had the plan in place to get all 300,000 Chinese students out of the country, right? A way to cut the visas off right away. Not that we're going to execute on it, but it was even in the thinking, and obviously it got leaked in the times that goes around the State Department, et cetera.
Right.
Look at all the appeasers. I am so glad. I take great pride that someone like Susan Thornton is now, owns a farm up in Maine, because she was part of this kind of, rational accommodationist, this kind of softness in the Defense Department, in the State Department, in our intelligence services, that basically went along with what China wanted to do and looked the other way.
But how do we? So I'm not a proponent of throwing there are 340,000 students here, and I know you're not a proponent.
I'm not a proponent. Here's what I am a proponent of. I'm a proponent of, if they're intelligence assets, I want to know that. Okay.
Yes.
What Miller's program was is that, hey, if we can prove this, they got to go home. Okay.
But and I'm not even focused directly on China or India or anywhere specifically. But why can't we have a policy with the sovereignty and national security of our own country? Why can't we say, if it's a weapons program, you just need to be an American citizen? And maybe you should be a naturally born American citizen.
You're asking basic fundamental questions.
It's simple.
I think that's on the book, and they get waivers. I believe that technically, when you look in the details, that's actually the fact, and there's kind of waivers given to this, because people look the other way.
Huh. Okay, and so one more issue is the Confucius Institutes.
Yes.
The Confucius Institutes are on many of our colleges. They're funded directly by the PLA.
Yeah.
Why do our colleges allow Confucius Institutes on campus?
It would be like in China having something funded by the CIA that was directly...
Or the Catholic Church.
Or the Catholic Church. Well,
right?
not the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has cut a deal that lets China...
I know.
No, but this is a huge
point.
issue. Pope Francis just cut a deal that lets the atheists that run the regime in Beijing actually pick our bishops. So the Catholic Church would not be a good idea since they've already kowtowed. It would be equivalent of having CIA or DNI have a student center that promoted CIA culture, right, to
China.
In China.
Yeah.
Okay, that ain't happening.
Yeah.
Okay, you know what's not happening? Because the Chinese say, hey, that's kind of
that's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen because that may affect our sovereignty.
Well, so give me a practical...
You got to unwind them.
How?
I think you just sit there and you got to shut them down.
Okay.
Right. I don't think there's any way.
Under what law?
I think. Hang on. This whole thing about people are saying, oh well, they're not that bad. They're pushing culture and they're helping students learn Mandarin. Hey, they're financed by the PLA.
They have server rooms in the Confucius Institutes. What the F's going on?
All this is going to be a shock to the American people. Here's why the American people don't know this, because nobody reports it. Has 60 Minutes ever gone and done a Confucius Institute?
They should.
Yeah, but they should have done it 20 years ago.
Yeah.
The reason this is coming up is there are people now fed up with this, and that's why in this Trump movement, it was Donald Trump, and when he came to the government that changed it, that now other people and other voices are coming up, and you're seeing a real pushback. But to allow this to happen at our universities, let's be brutally frank, why is it always Hudson Institute that's having Miles Kwok, or last night Mike Pence, Dr. Pillsbury's there? Why is it always Hudson Institute? Why is it not the other institutes having these kind of
well, because
conferences?
China has paid many of them.
The last thing that maybe I'll close on is when Li He, the economic strategist for President Xi, and I've had the opportunity to know him and build a little bit of a relationship. He's a very brilliant guy. When he came to do the major negotiation that didn't work out, I think it was in June of this past year, he came. And the very first day, he didn't go to the White House at first. He didn't go to Treasury at first. He shows up, and the very first day he spent on Capitol Hill with the quote-unquote free traders in the Republican Party. Remember, President Trump's, the greatest blowback he got on this was the Republicans.
Yeah.
It was the Republicans that went crazy. Oh, you got to do free trade. You got to do free trade. All the nomenclature that we've been using in regards to China has always been dismissed as, oh, that's just China. Okay? And so all the nomenclature has just been happy talk. And the words don't really mean what they are. And it's people like yourself, it's people like Miles Kwok, it's people like Dr. Pillsbury that are now starting to question this. And I think you see this whole thing that from quote-unquote engagement to conference, what they're pitting us on now, the new thing is that engagement versus confrontation. And we're being painted as the war party, right? We're the crazy guys who want to go to war. No, what we want to stop is an economic war that's been against the United States. And if you look at the group that's in the engagement process, all they've been in is being tapped along by China in these strategic economic dialogues that didn't go anywhere for 25 or 30 years and put us into the place where we were deindustrialized by a predatory power. And China's predatory capitalism is what they stand on. And so I think I couldn't be prouder that President Trump, and I think that speech, for people who have not seen that speech is going to go down in history as an inflection point, because Mike Pence yesterday, the Vice President of the United States, essentially threw down and said, hey, no more games. Yeah. We understand what you're doing. We understand what you're up to. We understand you have a full force of government against us, and we're going to counter that, and we're going to win.
I appreciate that. And this goes back to when you pull into the Commerce Department, right above the entryway where you drive through, I don't know if you've seen this, there's a quote from Benjamin Franklin. It says, commerce must be fair and equitable. And I think that's where we need to be. I don't think we should be overly punitive. No. I don't think we should be combative. I think we should say we just need a fair shake at things. Right. And what you're saying is we haven't had one, and that's something we believe too. And the good news is I think in the last 6 months to a year, culminating with Pence's speech a couple of days, or actually a day ago, is finally the narrative's changing, despite all of the efforts from those in China. So thanks for being here today. Thanks for sharing this with us. It was really nice.
Undisclosed location.
Undisclosed location. I mean, we're here with Miles.
You got to be undisclosed.
We got to keep.
Except he's live streaming it constantly. So that's
I don't know who's more controversial, you or Miles, but we'll see soon.
Miles is a whole different league. I'm junior varsity compared to that.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.